On a normal Friday, on November 8, 1957, at 11:30 a.m., a Boeing 377 Strata cruiser named Romance of the Skies, with registration number PA-944, was preparing for takeoff from San Francisco, California. It was scheduled to fly to Honolulu, Hawaii, with 8 crew members and 36 passengers. Everyone thought this would be a unique and luxurious experience. The Boeing aircraft they were riding on was truly the pinnacle of aviation technology at the time. It had 2 large passenger cabins with spacious seating, fully served light meals, including a small cocktail lounge for passengers to pass the time. In the 1950s, Pan American Airways was at the forefront of passenger air transport services. They had become the most reliable name for high-quality airline service, specifically catering to wealthy Americans. This flight was no different. But what they didn't know was that what would happen just a few hours later would become one of the greatest mysteries in the history of world aviation. You're watching MrBitut's channel. This is the strange story of Pan Am Flight 7. Like the legendary Boeing 314 predecessor, the Strata Cruiser was an unmatched masterpiece in terms of size, speed, and luxury. When Boeing introduced it to the world in 1947, it was hailed as a luxury castle in the sky. Romance of the Skies had Pullman-style sleeping berths, separate changing rooms for men and women, and a horseshoe-shaped cocktail lounge in the belly of the plane. The seats on the plane could recline back to be used as beds and had surprisingly spacious legroom of up to 12 meters. Not only that, the class of the flight was reflected in many other details. The standard 7-course dinner for short flights began with champagne and caviar served on porcelain dishes. The meals for first-class passengers on transatlantic flights were handled by Maxim of Perry, even when taking off at maximum weight. The Boeing 377 was faster than its 2 direct commercial competitors, the Douglas DC-6 and Lockheed Constellation. 4 Wright R436OB6 Wasp major piston engines, the largest ever built, helped it reach a maximum speed of 560 kilometers per hour and an impressive carrying capacity of up to 13 tons. Before takeoff, the cargo hold of Romance of the Skies was filled with luggage, mail, film reels for entertainment, and even a new IBM computer. The passengers on this flight reflected the impressive socioeconomic status of those who could afford to pay $300 for a one-way ticket to Hawaii or $1,600 for a round-the-world trip. If you're wondering, $1,600 at that time was equivalent to about $10,500 today. Who were these people? First, there was Robert Long, Deputy Vice President of Ronald Auto, and a former Air Force pilot who was taking a vacation with his wife Nicole. William Hague, a famous surgeon from LUV, and his wife Nauman were going to attend a medical conference. In Honolulu, Lee Clark, General Manager of Dow Chemical in Tokyo, would be going home with his family after this flight. Edward Ellis, Vice President and Sales Director of a spice company, was excited about touring the company's overseas plantations. Soledad Mercado, a fashion designer from Phoenix, hoped to find new international customers abroad. There were also many other notable passengers on board. Robert Alexander, a pilot for Pan Am himself, had planned a fishing trip to the islands with his wife and 2 children after arriving. William Deck, 24 years old, was preparing to go to Kyoto to marry a Japanese woman he had met while working with the U.S. Navy cultural attaché Thomas Mell was on his way to Rangoon, Myanmar, to fulfill his duty as a cultural attaché at the U.S. Embassy there. All of these passengers had clear plans or missions for their trip. They were simply enjoying themselves. All the information related to them was completely transparent. The crew members were no different. They were all professionals with expertise and experience. Commanding Flight 944 that day was Captain Golden Brown, 40 years old, a seasoned pilot with 15 years of experience with the airline. co-pilot wagon had worked for Pan Am for over a decade. Young pilot and Pine Tar was studying electrical engineering at night at a community college to prepare for promotion to senior airline pilot. Ivan Alexander, a beautiful blonde girl, was making daily efforts to care for her ailing father in San Francisco. Mary McGrath, a 26-year-old flight attendant, was a lively blonde girl remembered by her friends for her beauty and intelligence. Even while studying at a college in northern New York, Mary still dreamed of one day flying for Pan Am. You might find the information about these passengers and crew to be long and difficult to remember, but believe me, they were all extremely important and played a significant role in resolving the mysteries of this disappearance. At 11:30 a.m., Pan Am Flight 7 departed as scheduled. All technical checks and preparations were completed without detecting any abnormalities. The route was simply a direct flight from California to Hawaii. However, due to the relatively long distance, it was estimated that it would take about 9 hours and 30 minutes to complete. Therefore, according to regulations, the aircraft was required to register information with the ship to ensure that it was heading in the right direction. At 4:04 p.m. local time, from an altitude of over 3 kilometers, Captain Brown sent the regular radio position report to Pontryagin, a weather ship of the Coast Guard stationed in the Pacific to assist aircraft flying through the area. Romance of the Skies had just passed the point of no return and was heading in the right direction and on schedule. 1,866 kilometers from Honolulu and about 16 kilometers east of Punch. The sky was clear and the sea was calm. The sun was low in the western sky. The captain announced to the ground control that he would contact them again at 6 p.m. However, when the scheduled time arrived, there was no information from the flight. For the next 2 hours, there was no contact. The Coast Guard began a search operation. The U.S. Coast Guard and Navy used airplanes, submarines, and even the aircraft carrier USS Philippines. A total area of 380,000 square kilometers in the Gulf Pacific Ocean was thoroughly searched for many days using every possible means. Have they found anything? For nearly 60 years, those who were truly concerned about Pan Am Flight 7 have accepted the statement of the Civil Aeronautics Board that there was insufficient physical evidence at the time to determine the cause of the accident. But the details that were found told a completely different story. After many days of searching, the first clues appeared. Debris was found 90 miles north of the planned route, which led to 2 possibilities. Either the plane intentionally deviated from its course and then encountered an accident, or it deviated due to an accident and plunged into the sea. 14 out of the 19 bodies found were wearing life jackets, but no shoes, indicating that some people had prepared for the possibility of the plane making an emergency water landing. Ivan Alexander's body was still strapped into her seat, with the seatbelt and life jacket securely fastened. The floating debris of the fuselage and the distorted cabin suggested that the plane had dived into the sea with the nose slightly tilted downward. Although some of the bodies showed signs of impact injuries, according to the CAB report, most of the victims actually died from drowning, which meant that Romance of the Skies did not completely lose control during the final impact. The debris had burn marks, which were above the waterline, indicating that there was a fire after this accident. But there was no evidence of a fire while the plane was still in the air. Pan Am and the FBI suspected fraud in the reports issued by the Civil Aeronautics Board. This suspicion increased when the autopsy discovered abnormally high levels of carbon monoxide in 4 of the bodies. This gas was present in the blood of Captain Brown and all those sitting in the front and back of the plane, indicating that it had spread throughout the passenger compartment. So why did the cab say there was no evidence of a fire in the air? On November 18, 1957, when the aircraft carrier Philippines arrived at Long Beach with the recovered bodies and debris, a dispute broke out on the dock between representatives of the cab and FBI agents about who had jurisdiction over the case. This dispute escalated into an official power struggle between agencies, and ultimately the cab won. FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover turned his back on the investigation, ignoring calls from both the airline company and the head of the cab. Hoover left the question of who caused the disaster on PA 944 for the Civil Aeronautics Board to resolve on their own. Meanwhile, those with a special interest in this mysterious accident also took their own actions. They began their investigation by posting questions on a website managed by former Pan Am employees. The questions mainly related to information about the crew members of the flight, and surprisingly, they received countless responses from more than 20 pilots, navigators, flight engineers, and flight attendants who knew the victims. More importantly, former Pan Am employees revealed that the airline in 1957 had suspected one of their own as the cause of the disaster that year. But who specifically was that person? Former colleagues revealed that 46-year-old aircraft steward Eugene C. had previously had problems with Pan Am due to his abnormal behavior. Crosthwaite had once boasted that he intentionally dropped a meal on the kitchen floor before serving it to a captain he felt had insulted him. Crosthwaite blamed Pan Am for some of the misfortunes he encountered, including the tuberculosis he contracted in Shanghai while working as a steward on the airline's planes. Although he had fully recovered from the illness, Crosthwaite was desperate. After the death of his wife Julie from cancer, her death made him the sole guardian of Tanya, Julie's daughter from a previous marriage. The relationship between father and daughter was very tense. On November 10th, just a few days before the flight, Crosthwaite called the county sheriff's office to complain about his daughter, whom he referred to as a devil. He even blamed Tanya for his wife's death. Crosthwaite even revised his will on the early morning of the day the flight took off, stating that Tanya would only inherit his estate if she lived a moral and righteous Catholic life. A copy of the document was found in the glove compartment of Crosthwaite's car, parked at San Bruno. Pan Am considered the changed will as clear evidence, a sign that Crosthwaite had intended to commit suicide. The cab also assigned one of its investigators, Clue Strur, to further investigate Crosthwaite's background. This investigation seemed to increasingly build evidence against the flight steward. According to witness statements, Crosthwaite's father-in-law remembered that the suspect had shown him a handful of explosives a few days before the flight took off. And although they searched everywhere, Carl Schonberger and Crosthwaite's father-in-law could not find the explosives in the belongings left by the flight steward. For Schonberger, the biggest incriminating evidence was a casual remark made by Tanya to the sheriff about her stepfather. Tanya thought it was possible that Crosthwaite had committed suicide and killed the entire flight because he was too cowardly to go alone. But just as Pan Am seemed ready to conclude, 10 months after the tragedy, that it was the flight steward who caused the disaster, a new and unexpected suspect appeared. William Harrison Penn, 41 years old, a passenger on Romance of the Skies, was reportedly on his way to Hawaii to collect an overdue debt. Penn owned a hunting resort outside Scott, California, a small town near the Oregon border. With a relatively unstable economic situation like this, what motive could he have to cause the incident? It was discovered that right before the flight, Penn had purchased a total of 3 life insurance policies for himself. One of them had a clause that would pay the customer double the amount in case of death in an accident. The other 2 policies, from different companies, would pay a total of $125,000 to his wife in case of a similar situation. However, this was not entirely satisfactory. It's hard for anyone to trade their life for money if their life is still going well. This story must have some hidden complexities. Perhaps we need to look further to understand the whole story. Penn's story came to light in the pages of the San Francisco Examiner under the headline, "The Real Conspiracy Behind the Pacific Plane Crash." The source for this story was Russell Stiles, an investigator from Western Life Insurance Company. One of the insurance companies that Penn had purchased policies from. While waiting for the results of Stiles' investigation, Western Life withheld the payment to Penn's wife. When Stiles learned about Penn's background, he went to the FBI, but left in disappointment because, as mentioned, the FBI did not get involved in the case anymore. Stiles' subsequent investigation only deepened his belief that Penn had caused the plane crash to collect insurance money. In fact, Penn had never boarded Romance of the Skies. Stiles discovered that the suspect had previously had legal troubles for attempting to charge illegal fees on public roads whenever logging trucks passed by. After being threatened with arrest, he detonated a mine on the road, making the section of the road unusable. After interviewing people who knew Penn, Stiles finally found a possible motive leading to the crime. Penn owed his mother $10,000 to maintain his hunting resort, which was in the red and scheduled to be sold in June 1958, 7 months after Pan Am Flight 7 crashed. Harry Penn had married an old friend and neighbor of his wife's. 2 days after the newlyweds were still on their honeymoon week in Mossy Rocky Road, Harry's hunting resort was destroyed by fire. Although authorities suspected arson, the insurance companies, when faced with the prospect of being sued by Harry, quietly agreed to settle the claim. Meanwhile, the postmaster in Scott Bar told Stiles that Harry and his new husband had started receiving mysterious letters and packages from abroad. These letters were never replied to. In the late 1970s, independent investigators following Stiles' trail found him retired in a small mountain town in Colorado. He refused many requests for personal interviews, but his daughter revealed that Stiles was never satisfied with the outcome of the official investigation into the incident from years ago. Even after retiring from Western Life, he continued to investigate Penn with his own money. Stiles still believed that Penn was not only still alive, but might also be planning revenge. According to Stiles' daughter, until the day he died in March 1999, her father feared that one day he would be found by someone who had been monitoring him all along, a person who had been willing to kill an entire flight for an insurance payout. While Penn, Crosthwaite, and Western Life pointed fingers at Penn, some cab investigators blamed another culprit: technical issues with the Boeing 377 aircraft. The Boeing 377 was famous for having a history of propeller problems. Initially, they used 7-foot Hamilton standard hydromatic propellers with hollow steel cores lined with rubber. However, centrifugal force tended to push the synthetic rubber lining in the core toward the tips of the blades, creating an imbalance. In some cases, this could cause the propeller blades to break off. When the Boeing 377 Stratocruiser of Pan Am crashed in the Brazilian rainforest in 1952, investigators found that it had actually broken into pieces after losing control due to a broken propeller and then an engine. A broken propeller blade, or one that was spinning at excessive speeds, was a nightmare for any flight crew. A propeller spinning at an abnormally high speed would also cause the plane's speed to increase suddenly. What was even scarier was that losing control of the plane due to a propeller issue could happen with almost no warning, and the pilots only had a few seconds to react. A year earlier, a propeller and engine failure had forced the sister ship of Romance of the Skies, Clipper Sovereign of the Skies, to make an emergency landing on the way from Hawaii to San Francisco, near the location where the plane would later crash. After circling until dawn, the crew managed to land safely. All 31 passengers and crew were able to evacuate the plane before it sank completely. Interestingly, the final CABE report on Pan Am Flight 7 paid little attention to the plane's previous speed issues and stated that Romance of the Skies had never experienced speed-related problems, but a phone call from one of Pan Am's veteran radio operators and former B-377 pilot Glenn Smith contradicted this statement. He recalled that he had once flown Romance of the Skies when it experienced propeller issues on a flight to Hawaii in June 1957, just 6 months before it went missing. Fortunately, he was able to land the plane safely at the airport that day. That's not all. The final pieces of the puzzle about the mysterious incident might have been provided by 2 other former experts, Frank Garcia and Tony Vasco. For decades, Garcia, a former flight engineer, had suspected that the cause of the loss of control of the Sovereign of the Skies propeller was a small component in the engine nose, cone responsible for transferring oil to the propeller hub. A failure of the oil transfer pipe, or the fitting connecting to the dome, would cause the position of the propeller blades to be incorrect. But convincing evidence for Garcia's account still lies at the bottom of the sea. What about Tony Vasco? Did he have anything to say? Tony Vasco was the technical director at Eastern Airlines until he retired in 1990. He was an expert in aircraft engines and propellers. Vasco frequently contributed ideas to well-known technical and aviation journals. He found evidence showing that Pan Am, the manufacturers, and the Federal Aviation Administration had realized at the time of the Romance of the Skies accident that the oil transfer pipe was welded instead of bolted into the correct position. In summary, technical issues could also be a significant factor that caused Pan Am Flight 7 to never return home. Anyway, the final conclusion has been reached, and it still exists to this day. To reach this conclusion, they went through many tense hearings, reviewing and reanalyzing all the available evidence and reports. The official cab hearings on the PA 944 accident, the registration number of Romance of the Skies, began on the morning of January 15, 1958, in a crowded classroom at the prestigious Sir Francis Drake Hotel in San Francisco. Over 2 days, 5 cab safety investigators examined 90 items, including personal belongings rescued from the accident site. They questioned 19 witnesses, including maintenance staff, baggage handlers, and other Pan Am employees. The cab experts paid almost no attention to the possibility of sabotage, focusing instead on the possibility of technical failures, as we have just analyzed together. On the Monday of the hearings, the CAB investigators considered the possibility that the crew of Flight 944 had sent a distress call, but several factors made the connected devices unable to clearly receive the signals. Audio recordings made on the day of the accident were recorded by AR Inc. stations in San Francisco, Los Angeles, and Chicago. The board also collected the audio recordings and sent them to Bell Labs audio experts for analysis. The engineers at Bell could not find any messages on the audio tapes, except for one case. 15 minutes after the captain's final regular radio report, they heard a distorted transmission containing the words 4B, which might refer to Pan Am's call sign for aircraft 944. Independently, a group of Pan Am pilots who are close friends of the Flight 944 crew also listened to the audio recordings. They reported that the recordings actually contained a message, but the words were very faint and could not be decoded or were meaningless. Finally, the pilots informed the cab that most of the words and phrases used in the message were unfamiliar. With radio communication procedures, some words clearly did not fit the situation being investigated. They believed there was no possibility that the message described in the report originated from PA 944. On January 16, 1958, the safety experts of the board postponed the hearing for more than 16 hours of testimony and hundreds of documents that were not presented. No consensus was reached on the cause of the accident. In their report, the cab investigators expressed more certainty in the Pan Am pilots about not receiving any radio messages from the plane after the emergency situation began. On January 17, 1958, one day after the official investigation ended, audio engineers from Dictaphone Corporation volunteered to reanalyze the AR Inc. audio recordings After 2 weeks of using advanced equipment borrowed from Voice the America, they claimed to have decoded a weak transmission from Romance of the Skies. Dictaphone discovery was compelling enough to convince the cab to send the AR Inc. audio recordings to other audio experts for further analysis. And here, the investigation into the accident took a rather strange turn. One of the most dramatic moments of the hearings was the testimony of ICE, the chairman of the local 505 Transport Workers Union. The members of this union were the maintenance crew for Pan American at San Francisco. ICE lamented that Pan Am had drastically cut staff for inspections, leading to dangerous shortcomings in inspection and maintenance work. During the 9-hour flight from the West Coast to Hawaii, first-class passengers could stretch their legs in spacious legroom, enjoy drinks at the cocktail lounge in each gender section of the plane, and then sit down to enjoy a 7-course dinner. Passengers on overnight flights to Europe and Asia slept on Pullman-style beds. Pan Am was losing money on the Stratocruisers and had planned to replace them with faster, cheaper jet planes. Until then, the company had decided to save money by applying some controversial quick maintenance measures, such as allowing mechanics, instead of supervisors, to sign off on checklists and only running 1/3 of the engines and propellers on test stands. After major overhauls, the recklessness in maintenance became evident when ICE opposed the allegations. The cab inspectors valued these so much that they visited the airline's maintenance facility in San Francisco unannounced. After the hearings, they reported to their superiors that the inspection or quality control during engine overhauls was inadequate, and the maintenance activities were questionable. Even more alarming was the fact that the disappearance of Flight 944 was not an isolated incident. The airline that advertised itself as the most experienced in the world had recently suffered a series of Stratocruiser disasters. In the span of 3 years, 3 Pan B377s had failed over the Pacific. In 1955, engine number 3 of the Clipper United States aircraft on the way to Honolulu had broken off the wing and fallen out, causing the plane to shake violently and lose control, although the pilots eventually regained enough control to land the plane offshore in the Pacific. 2 passengers and 2 crew members died due to exposure or drowning. Influential journalist Grill Pond used his nationally syndicated column to publicly report on these incidents. This seemed to confirm that Pan Am's maintenance activities had been neglected. In the cab hearings on PA 944, the testimony related to the aircraft's maintenance history was full of contradictions and even blatant falsehoods. Maintenance records presented as evidence at the hearings told another concerning story. In the weeks before the accident, the 944 engine had experienced continuous fluctuations in oil pressure due to a faulty turbocharger and ongoing issues with the lubrication system. In May 1958, J.J. Kenway, a lawyer representing Pan Am, wrote a letter to cab official Robert Schaff, protesting Chris's plan to cite Pan Am's sloppy maintenance in the government report. In a private letter to the airline's legal department, Kenway bluntly admitted that he hoped to convince Chris to keep the maintenance report out of the public record. The pressure was mounting for a final solution to the case. By October 1958, nearly a year after the disappearance of Flight 944, Oscar Beck, the director of the safety board, announced to his superiors that due to the large number of requests for reports from the public, relatives, and members of Congress, further delays could not be accepted. 2 months later, the government released the final report on the disappearance of Romance of the Skies. While the SHAB admitted that it was entirely possible that the crew had sent an emergency call, the board could not definitively determine that any emergency transmission came from PA 944. Another unexplained mystery was the carbon monoxide gas found in some of the bodies. Although the cab report acknowledged that they had found some irregularities in the airline's maintenance practices, the lack of a clear emergency call and physical evidence from the accident prevented them from linking it to the accident. report did not mention Finn's allegations of poor maintenance. Readers also found no admission that within the agency, the conclusions of the report had caused controversy. Finally, the mystery of Pan Am Flight 7 remained unsolved unless technology advanced to the point where we could search the ocean floor to retrieve what was left of Romance of the Skies, or find evidence proving that William Penn was still alive after November 8, 1957. If not, the questions about this tragedy would continue to exist for many years to come. So, what do you think truly caused Pan Am Flight 7 to transform from a luxurious flight into a journey to hell? Was it the calculations of humans for personal purposes, or due to technical errors caused by the irresponsibility of relevant departments? Please leave your comments below this video so we can discuss and clarify the incident together. Now, remember to subscribe to the MrBitut channel, hit the notification bell, and see you in the next videos.